flip to Acts chapter 27. If you've got a journaling Bible that we've given you, it's on page 152. We are nearing the home stretch. We've been in the book of Acts for quite some time. If you have looked to the end of the book, we are just a couple pages. Acts has 28 chapters. We're in chapter 27 today. And here's the thing about the book of Acts, man. It's a historical, what we would classify as a historical narrative. So when you look at the title of Acts, it actually usually says Acts of the Apostles. And this is the story of the first century church, right? So we have the first four books, the Gospels of the New Testament that chronicle the life of Jesus. And then we have the book of Acts. And Acts actually chronicles the life of the New Testament church, the birth of the church. And so we've kind of been in this for a minute, and what we're going to see today in the book of Acts is a couple different things. What happens sometimes when we study narrative passages is we typically read ourselves into the story, right? We like to go, oh, I like this guy, like I can relate mostly to him, and we read ourselves into the story. And so today we're actually going to see some terms, and there's a reason why I'm pointing all this out. Like there's several little islands that are going to get named. There's some ships that are going to get named, some people that are going to get named. And sometimes we look at these and we're like, why is this there, right? But ultimately, chapter 27 is a story. It's a storm narrative. It's about a storm story, if you will. And if you've ever studied your Bible, there's a lot of storm stories in the New Testament and in the Old Testament. And here's the reason why. Is just because they don't have the modern technology. They weren't flying around everywhere like we do. So there's largely lots of bodies of water that encompass the area, rivers and different things. And so there's a lot of storm stories in the scriptures. And what happens, and this is my word of caution, what happens is often we look at these storm stories and we relate that to ourselves and we go, oh, when the storms of life come, this is what I'm supposed to do. Right? And because we do that, we forget sometimes to actually recognize that these are real places and real people and real storms. So the reason that all these little islands are named today, the reason we see some of our sailing terms and some normal practices is because this was a real storm. This wasn't allegory. This wasn't going, oh, when the storms of life come, we should try to do this. This is literally life or death. They're on a ship and a huge storm comes and they are risking running aground, which they eventually do, not to give you the end of the story just yet, right? So here's what I want to do is we kind of unpack and kind of walk through Acts chapter 27 today. I'm going to give you 4 different principles. We're going to see these as we go throughout the text, but I just want to make sure that we're recognizing as we see these practical, helpful points of application that we learn from Paul's story, that we're not just putting an allegorical type of claim on this, that we're actually seeing this as this is a real event with real people that were in real danger, and there's some real principles that we can learn from their story. So Acts chapter 27, we're going to start in verse number 1, and we'll go through about 2/3 of the chapter or so. All right, you ready? Here we go. Shift into drive. Let's go. Acts chapter 27, verse number 1. And when it was decided that we, circle the word we, that's I've pointed this out throughout our story and as we chronicle. This is Luke who's written this book of Acts. He's included, so he's traveling with Paul. So this would be considered one of the we passages. So we know that Luke is with Paul. So when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some of the other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking on a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and to be cared for. So let me pause there and just kind of illustrate a few of the things that I just talked about, right? So it's a we passage. So Luke traveling with him. We have the name of the ship. This is important because, again, this is just telling us this is a real ship in a real place. And this wasn't a big ship. It was a smaller ship because it just sails along the coast. So if you remember, they're in Caesarea, and I'm not going to show you a map because I'm not really a map guy, but here's the easy things to recognize is that Caesarea is on the southeastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. So if you're looking at a map and you were looking at it, it would be on the right-hand side. and they've got to go to Rome, which is in Italy, way to the northwest, right? So they've got to go up and to the left. If you're just looking at a map, let me just give it to you that simply, right? If I need to speak in terms that my wife would understand, I would say, like, hey, go straight until you see the ground and then turn left, right? Or until the big tree or until the Walmart or something like that, right? And then turn left there. I'm not giving directions, right? We can just put it in and ask Siri, and she'll tell us where we're going. So this ship wasn't a big ship. It was a little ship. And it would just sail from port to port to port in safe water, not big water. The town I grew up in West Texas wasn't a huge town. It was the biggest town around us, but wasn't a huge town. We had an airport, but the airport only had one gate and 5 flights a day, and they all went to Dallas, right? It's because there's a regional jet that would only service. It was, American Airlines is the only one that flew in and out of this of our town, and so this is kind of the same sort of ship, right? Those little planes just take you to where you can connect with the bigger plane. That's what this ship is. It's a small ship that can sail along the ports until they can find a bigger place. But watch what happens. It says that Julius, the centurion, you remember centurions over 100 troops. The centurion Julius, it says that he treated Paul well, right? He gave him leave to go to his friends and to be cared for. This is the first time in the story that we've seen Paul receive a favor, right? You remember all the other times it was the Jews asking the centurions, asking the leaders, the commanders, the governors. They were like, hey, we want you to give us a favor. But you remember what I said a couple weeks ago when we studied, when Paul appealed to Caesar, the Jews kind of drop out of the conversation. They're completely gone. Now he's in Roman hands. He's been tried. He's been talked to. And they're like, man, you're not guilty of anything. You're not a flight risk. We're not in danger because of you. But you've appealed, so we're going to take you up there. So Julius just kind of gives Paul a favor. And what does Paul do? It says that he goes to his friends. Right? So if I were to give us just a simple application point, number one, I would say, take every opportunity to enjoy Christian community. Right? Take every opportunity to enjoy Christian community. We've actually seen Paul do this a number of different times throughout his travels. He was a very experienced traveler, had been all over the place, probably on this journey the most experienced traveler. And we've seen him a number of times. He'd go to somewhere he's never been before, and what would he do? He would find the brothers, right, or the friends. This is his Christian community. In fact, actually in sermon number 50 in this series, today, by the way, is sermon number 62. We've been here a minute, right? All the way back in Acts chapter 20, when we talked through Acts chapter 20, here was my big idea of that day. It said, encouragement is the heartbeat of Christian community. Encouragement was the heartbeat of Christian community. That's what Paul had seen. That's what he had experienced. That's what he had longed for. We talked about the one another passages that Paul's right. Paul has written more than 60 different times. He's used this phrase, one another, stressing the importance and the need of Christian community. And he didn't just preach it, he practiced it. He knew it and he lived it. So Paul shows up in Sidon. We don't know much about this town or where he was, but we knew that he needed Christian community. And so Julius did him a favor. And he says, hey, go find your friends, man. And the friends ministered to him. So no matter where you are, this is not reading ourselves into the story, but we can learn from Paul's example to say, man, take every opportunity to enjoy Christian community. No matter where we are, no matter if we're across the world or if we're here, enjoy your Christian community. Take advantage of it. Be part of it. Maybe you're sitting here and you're like, I don't know why I'm here. I'm here by accident. Maybe it was a PCS that you couldn't control, right? An unexpected job change. Or maybe you're a kid and you're like, I'm just here because my parents made me, right? That's part of being here, and you're wondering why or how or what's next. And you're just like, man, take every opportunity to enjoy Christian community. Plug in, serve, attend, be a part of things, go to small group. That's where life happens. Be vulnerable and not guarded. Don't have a temporary mindset that says, oh, I'm only here for a year, so I'm just going to keep it surface. Not jump in, man. The full value of Christian community only happens when we're fully in. So take every opportunity to enjoy Christian community. Let's keep going, verse number 4. And putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Sicilia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. And we sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulties to Cnidus. And there the wind did not allow us to go further. We sailed under the lee of Crete off of Salmon. Coasting along with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because of even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there, and on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. So they put to sail. We see some sailing terminology under the lee of Crete. That just means under the safe side, the wind-protected side. So if the wind is blowing from the north, they're going to be sailing along the southern border of Crete. This is opposite of what Paul experienced in his second missionary journey when they were traveling in the spring and the summer when the winds were coming from the southwest, and they sailed along the northern coast of Crete. This is just Luke telling us, hey, this is all normal. These are clues of real things and real places. So they're headed to Rome, started in Caesarea. This is a journey that would normally take, under normal circumstances, about 4 weeks. In total, we'll see as we get there next week when Paul arrives in Rome. This is about a 4-month journey. So this is 3 to 4 times the amount of time that it should have normally taken. They find an Alexandrian ship. Again, this is all backing up the accuracy of history. Rome was known to get all of its grain from Egypt. So there was normal for these big ships from Alexandria, Egypt, to sail through the Mediterranean and go all the way up to Rome to provide them with grain. These were big, heavy ships that could handle the open water for the most part. Right? So they get on this Alexandrian ship, and it says that the winds were against them, multiple stops. We use this phrase, with great difficulty. All this is telling us, right? This is normal things happening in the fall, the wrong time of the year to be traveling north. In fact, it says even the days of the fast was over. And the fast was the days of atonement, or what the Jewish holiday now we would call it Yom Kippur. In fact, in this particular year, as best we can tell historically, this was somewhere in the mid-October range. So it's just the wrong time of year to be going north. And Paul's like, hey guys, I've got a little bit of experience traveling, right? And he stands up and he's like, I think this is the wrong time of the year, and this is going to be pretty dangerous, and there's a lot at risk. Now, I just want to point out, Paul did not say, hey, I have a word from the Lord. This is going to happen. So this is not a prophetic word. This is just Paul's experience speaking. And in fact, if we remember some of the details about Paul's previous journeys, Paul's actually been shipwrecked 3 different times. I don't know about you, but I'm probably not going to pick him as a traveling companion, right? I don't want to get on a boat with Paul if he's already been shipwrecked for 3 different times. So Paul's just saying, hey guys, I've been all over the place. I've traveled a lot in different times of year. I've been wrecked a few different times. I don't think we should be going. But do they listen? They don't listen, right? They're like, you're just a prisoner. We got things figured out. We're going to give it a shot. Right? We don't really like Fair Haven. Fair Haven was actually not very fair. Wasn't a great place to winter in for whatever reason. And so they're like, there's a port up here a little ways. We're going to try to get over there, right? And they go, which brings me to application point number 2. Listen to the guy with the most experience. Experience doesn't come easily. You only get experience by walking through some stuff. And Paul walked through a lot of stuff. And he's just telling them, like, hey guys, I don't think this is a good decision. Like, this is the wrong time of year to be going in the wrong direction. He's not trying to get out of going or anything along those lines. He's not trying to break the rules or escape or anything. He's just saying, like, this is not a good decision. But they don't listen to the guy with the most experience. There's a saying that says experience is a hard teacher because she gives the test first and the lesson later. Right? You don't get experience without walking through some things, which means if somebody has experience, they've walked through a lot of stuff. We just say stuff in a general sense, but you know what I'm talking about, right? Some stuff with business, at work, with a boss, with an employee, a coworker, some stuff at school, with admin, some stuff with your kids, stuff with your parents, right? Stuff happens. You don't get that experience, so we always want to listen to the guys with experience. I've been blessed with a few different relationships in my life, and I have somebody that might call a coach or a mentor, people that are around me that have a lot more experience. I have a leadership guy that's got a ton of business leadership experience. When I have a leadership question, I call him. And I'm like, hey, let me run this by you and just kind of get your take on it, see what you might think. I've got a girl dad mentor, right? I've got a really good friend of mine that has 3 daughters, all about 10 years or so older than my 3 daughters, and he's walked through stuff that I haven't walked through yet. So when I have a question, a girl dad question, I call Jeff, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? What did you do here? Have you ever experienced this? Like, how do you handle all the tears, like, or all the emotions, or all the sinks clogged up with hair? You know, I don't know what to do with this. Like, this is just part of it, right? I have a girl dad mentor. I have a finance friend that's really, really good at numbers and finance. And so if I'm asking about investments or debt or purchases or whatever, I call him and I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, am I stupid? And he's usually like, yeah, that's not a good decision, right? So I try to listen to him. I've got pastor friends of mine that have been in ministry longer than I have that I just ask questions about. Church planter friends that have, you know, are a generation or a season further along than we are. I just want to just listen. That's all I'm trying to say is listen to the guy with the most experience. Notice I said the one with most experience, not necessarily the one in charge. Because sometimes the guy in charge doesn't actually know what he's doing. Right? The problem with that is sometimes we're the one in charge. And we don't know what we're doing. So find the people in your lives that have more experience with you. Admit when you don't know what's going on and just say, hey, I'm trying to do the best I can. Let's find the guy with more experience and pay attention to what they have to say. Let's continue on, Verse 13. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing, circle that word, supposing that they had obtained their purpose. What does that mean? Supposing they were right. The south wind comes, blows gently, and they're like, oh, we got our window. We knew what we were talking about. Let's go. And they launch. They weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore, but soon, a tempestuous wind called the northeastern struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught, we could not face the wind, and we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat, and after hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, and began the next day to jettison the cargo, and on the 3rd day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands, when neither the sun nor the stars appeared for many days, with no small tempest lay upon us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. So this small weather window shows up. They're like, we know we're right. Let's go. And they take off, and there's this small little bitty island 23 miles southwest of Crete called Cauda, and there they pull in their small boat. That's on a big ship. They would usually drag a small boat, kind of like a lifeboat that they could run to shore back and forth with. They bring that in, and they get these ropes, and they undergird the ship. This is a bad sign. This is what it means. They would literally run ropes under the ship. And they would tie it off on both sides as tight as possible. And the reason they would do that is because when they anticipated hitting ground and everything began to shake and move, these ropes would help keep everything together. This is a bad sign, right? Not good news, because they had fear of running aground in something they called Syrtis. Syrtis, an extra-biblical first-century history, was a big deal. It shows up a lot. They called it the Sands of Cyrene. There was a town in northern Africa, and there's a little bit of a jet up of land in northern Africa, and there's a town right there called Cyrene, a city called Cyrene, and there's a long stretch of very shallow land that goes way out into the Mediterranean, still there to this day. Many, many, many ships ran aground in this area. They called it Syrtis, or the Sands of Cyrene, and they were like, this is going to happen. Says that they're violently storm-tossed. They begin to jettison the cargo. That means they throw their stuff. They're dumping their grain. They're putting everything out. They're getting rid of stuff because the storm is just pounding them. A couple months ago, actually it was in November of last year, there was a video going around of a cruise ship that got busted in a storm. And I actually did a little work on it to figure it out. It was a Royal Caribbean ship named Explorer of the Seas, November 2024. Because we have all modern technology and social media, we get to see these things. I've already previously confessed many times how many hours I spend wasting looking at videos. But I remember watching this video of this inside this giant cruise ship, of the ship just tossing and swaying back and forth. And there's a guy trying to walk across, and he's leaning hard one side to the other. And then there's just stuff from a store that begins to, as the ship turns, it just comes flying across the screen. And then there was a lady that lost her balance and fell over, literally head over heels, and rode across the screen, which was hilarious for me, right? I thought it was really funny to watch, but she probably didn't seem that way. She probably didn't appreciate that video so much. But this is the same type of panic that we're hearing about, right? We just don't have Facebook to share it, right? Same type of panic, same type of fear, maybe more is happening. And it says, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Can I just give you application number 3? You have to fight for hope. Man, you got to fight for hope. What I appreciate, man, is they started doing everything that they knew how to keep it all together. I remember as a kid growing up, I was what would be called nowadays as what we would refer to at the time as a latchkey kid. I would come home. I usually walked home from school. I had a key to the house, that I was around my neck. My mom and dad both worked, and so I'd get home. And so often we'd get home, if I wasn't going down to the pond to fish, I just watched whatever reruns were on the television at the time. And there was an old show called Gilligan's Island. Man, you know the theme song, once it gets stuck in your head, it's there for a long time. Here's what verse number 3 says of the Gilligan's Island theme song. The weather started getting rough and the tiny ship was tossed. If not for the courage of the fearless crew, the minnow would be lost. And then it repeats, right? And the minnow would be lost. I love that they did everything that they can do, that they were fighting for hope. They were trying to keep it alive, but alas, many days, it says, they couldn't see the sun or the stars. Hope was abandoned. It's not easy to keep hope alive, is it? It's just not. Things stacking up, and the end is nowhere in sight, and we're like, I don't see how we're going to get out of this. No idea what's going to happen. And it goes from bad to worse. It's just hard, man. It's hard to keep hope alive. A couple weeks ago, I was down on the bay and went fishing, and I actually had a couple guys. Andrew was with us, and Mike Sigmund was with us. My father-in-law, Mike, was with us. There's 4 of us. And we're going down fishing. And it was Monday after Easter, actually. Storms were in the forecast. And they're like, what do you think about the rain? I was like, I've been down there a lot of times when, the rain's spotty. You can usually get around it. It'll be fine. They listened to the guy with experience, right? And that morning it was cloudy for sure, but we launched our boats and we go out and we start fishing and we catch a few fish and we press back and there's some rain that comes on and off. But here's what happens normally is you can see through the rain. So it wasn't hard rain. It was kind of some warning showers is what I would call it now. But we got wet a little bit and we just press on and they're like, what should we do? And I'm like, oh, we're fine. Let's go fishing, right? So we're about 2 miles or so from the truck, way back in these back lakes. And man, it started to rain hard. I mean, it started to really rain. Like about 20 minutes, 30 minutes in, and we see the first flash of lightning. Not a good sign, right? When you're fishing with the fiberglass fishing pole in your hands, the only thing you have to propel you is an aluminum paddle, right? Not a good situation to be in. So we basically just hunker down. We put our poles down, and we put our paddles down, and we just sit there in the rain. And there wasn't anything on my body that wasn't wet. We were completely soaked in water. And through the little warning showers, I remember looking back and making sure what's going on. I pulled my phone out and checked my radar a couple times, but you could typically see through the rain. You could see texture on the other side. And I remember after about half an hour or so sitting there, I looked back and in all directions I could see nothing but dark gray. And I was like, we got to get out of here, right? The hope of the fishing trip was gone. Right? We had abandoned all hope. Different situation, obviously. We weren't in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. We were in 12 inches of muddy water. But I wonder, they started preparing for the worst. And it actually says, if you look in verse number 20, it says, in all hope of our. Notice that pronoun is a first person plural pronoun, right? This is Luke, the author of this book, of this letter. He's like, man, his hope was lost. The hope of the captain, the centurion, the owner of the ship, all of the people, the hope was gone. Seemed inevitable, but that's when Paul steps in. Right? That's when Paul steps. It's like, hey, this is bad. He just can't take it any longer. This is bad theology. This is the same Paul who would write to the Colossian church in Colossians chapter 1, verse 27. He says, Christ in you, the hope. He uses that word intentionally, the hope of glory. He writes to the Corinthian church in 2 Corinthians 1, verse 7. He says, our hope for you is unshaken, for we know as you share in our sufferings, you will also share in our comfort. Paul can't stand the lack of hope. This is poor theology in his mind. We have hope in Christ. We have confidence that God has told me that I'm going to testify in Rome. This is not going to happen, so he has to say something. Watch what happens, verse 21. Since they've been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and speaks. And here's what he says. Men, you should have listened to me and not set sail from Crete. This is like the ultimate, I told you so. Why didn't you listen to me? I knew what I was talking about. He says, we should have not set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now that we're here, let me not rub it in your face. He says, I urge you to take heart. Take heart. Don't lose hope. He says, there's going to be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of God to whom I belong and to whom I worship. And he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who set sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God. Can I give you application number 4? Hope in Jesus is a hope that will never disappoint. Hope in Jesus is a hope that will never disappoint. Paul's like, hey guys, you should have paid attention. This wasn't him, however, saying, like, this wasn't throwing it back in their face. This wasn't an I told you so moment. He's just reminding them. He's trying to get their attention. He's like, hey, remember me? I've traveled a ton. I've been shipwrecked 3 different times. But that's not what he's drawing attention to. Here's what he's drawing attention to. He's saying, hey, guys, pay attention here because God is doing something that you can't see yet. He's like, there's a promise. And the God that I serve and the God that I worship, he is faithful to fulfill his promises. He always does what he says he's going to do. And God has said, and he's affirmed it tonight, that I'm going to testify to him. He says, so take heart. Don't lose hope. Don't abandon your hope. Instead, take heart. Have faith. You remember last week when Eugene pointed out in Paul's defense in his speech, in his conversation with Agrippa, you remember what he said? I have the help that comes from God. I have the help that comes from God. Paul's saying, pay attention. God is doing something here that only God can do. I've had this help time and time again from God. That only God can do these things. God is doing something bigger. I don't know what or how or when, but it's happening because hope in Jesus is a hope that will never disappoint. The word hope that's used is the Greek word elpis, and it's not used flippantly. It's not like a hope like, I hope the Dallas Cowboys win the Super Bowl. That's not what we're talking about, right? I don't have a lot of confidence in that hope. Right? But this word hope is used only in the context of a confident expectation. Like when all things are lined up, we can have hope in God because we have a confident expectation that God is going to be faithful, because there's never been a time in which God has not been faithful, so we can have hope that God will be faithful again. So if God has told me this, I have faith, I have hope, confident expectation that God is going to allow this to come to pass. He says, take heart. I have faith in God. I have this unwavering, confident expectation. You remember we talked about experience earlier, what it means to walk through stuff. I said, listen to the guy with the most experience. That's what Paul is saying. Have hope. Right? When our hope is in Jesus, it will never disappoint. Some of us in this room are walking through some things. I don't know what you're walking through fully. A diagnosis you didn't want, a prognosis that seems hopeless, a move or an assignment that you didn't see coming, a relationship that took a turn. Somebody took some money, they crossed a line, they said some things they can't take back. Someone you thought you could trust, thought they would be faithful and they weren't. A child that says, hey mom, you can trust me, don't worry, nothing's happening. A parent that tells his kid, hey, don't worry about the yelling, like we're okay. And then it comes crashing down, right? We can put our hope in a lot of different things. Can I just tell you, if you don't know this already, everything you put your hope in this earth will fail you at some point. Your spouse will fail you at some point. Your teacher will fail you at some point. Your parent, your kid, your pastor, I will fail you at some point. Right? Your boss. There's only one thing that will not fail, and that's our hope in Jesus. Hope in Jesus will never disappoint. Let me read Paul's words from the book of Romans, chapter number 5. He talks about hope. He says, therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Through him we have also obtained access by faith into his grace, which we stand and we rejoice in hope of the glory of God. Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that our sufferings produce endurance, and our endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Often we look at our sufferings, and sometimes we just simply define suffering as something that doesn't go our way. When things aren't going our way, which isn't always sufferings, but Often we look at our sufferings, our circumstances, what's happening, and we say, there's no God. There's no way that God would let this happen to me. Jesus doesn't love me. He doesn't care about me because of this circumstance. All those people at church were wrong, right? My parents were wrong. My boss was wrong. My friends were wrong. The pastor was wrong, because if there was an eternal God that loves me, then he would never let this happen to my life. And here's what happens is we judge an eternal, all-powerful God based on a temporary circumstance in our life. Paul says that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope will not put us to shame. Everything in this world will disappoint us in some point except for Jesus. In Jesus, we're justified by faith, and we have peace with God. And let me just say as we wrap up, if there's no peace in your life, and I'm not talking about temporal peace, like, hey, things are okay right now. I'm talking about deep down, you know what I'm talking about. Like a wondering, is there's something not right? There's something more. Deep down peace. If there's no peace in your life, can I just tell you that Jesus came to give us life and to give us abundant life, a life that's full of peace. It doesn't mean our circumstances are going to be easy or go the way that we want them to go every single time, but man, there is a deep down peace, a confident expectation, a hope in Jesus that will never disappoint. And I invite you to shift your hope from whatever you're hoping in right now to Jesus, because it will never disappoint. Let's pray together, church.